All right, well, thank you, everyone. Just one other housekeeping bit. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen as we progress through our evening forum. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Gorgel to kick us off.
Great, thanks, Ginny. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is our second listening session for the budget that we're hosting. We really just want to provide an opportunity to provide a space for folks to ask questions or provide more information about the budget. Last week, we really looked at culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, and transportation. This week, we're really going to look at safety, neighborhood livability, and social health, as well as high-performing government. That doesn't mean that you can't ask questions about any of those areas. It's just that Travis from Finance is going to present on those three. So with that, I'll turn it over to Travis. And if you have questions during the presentation, please just put them in the Q&A, as Ginny mentioned. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councilmember Gorgel, and welcome everybody. Always appreciate the opportunity to engage and interface directly with members of the community. As Councilmember Gorgel suggested, we're going to cover 3 of the 7 outcome areas, the remaining 3 that were not covered last week. I know we also have a recording of last week's session as well, and I'm sure we can get that posted in the chat if anybody wasn't here for that particular discussion. I'm going to share my screen here and just get the slideshow started. But as Councilmember Gorgel suggested, these presentation materials are really a platform for the dialogue this evening. We want to make sure that everybody here can use this time to ask the questions that are on their mind and share the thoughts that are on their mind. And this material is really for context setting as much as anything. So if I could get just a quick thumbs up from my fellow panelists that the slides are up and displayed on the screen. Wonderful, thank you. So here are all 7 outcomes of the city's budgeting for outcomes process. And we're gonna cover 3 of the 7 this evening. Again, neighborhood livability and social health, safe community, and high performing government. These are the same 3 areas that were covered last night in great detail with all 7 city council members at the council work session. A quick review of sort of the public policy side of this budget. We're, of course, right here on September 23rd, and last night was the second of 3 work sessions. As we look ahead into October for the remaining public engagement, council interactive dialogue, and council adoption process, that'll really kick back up again on October 6th with a second public hearing. If you're so inclined, please do utilize one of our options, either in person or virtually, to share your feedback directly with all 7 members of the council at that public hearing. And then the October 13th work session really exists to kind of wrap it all up and share back as a staff, City Council, here's what we heard that you asked us to adjust within the budget in order to fund or defund the operations that the council sees fit. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of the highlights of the neighborhood livability and social health area. This statement on this slide is from the Fort Collins Strategic Plan and is to provide a high quality built environment, support connected neighborhoods, seek to advance equity and affordability, and foster the social health of the community. Just to kind of give a snapshot of the services that the Fort Collins City government offers underneath this area. In no particular order, some of our objectives are to address the impact of increasing poverty within the community, concerns about housing affordability and homelessness, equitable access to city services and amenities across all neighborhoods, equitable and inclusive engagement with the community members and embracing of diversity. On the planning, zoning, and land use side of things, it is encouraging our growing community to develop in a manner that is consistent with the city's master plan and is consistent with our goals around quality, high quality, affordable housing options for all residents of the community. So to review this outcome area in brief, some of the changes that you would observe in this budget when you compare to the budget from 2 years ago. These can take the form, as we discussed last week, this can take the form of an enhancement or an increase in service, a reduction due to some of the revenue impacts of the COVID-19 crisis, and other trade-offs. So some of the enhancements, the city has created a housing manager position. Our city council has a very high priority placed on affordable housing within our community. In addition to the position itself, there's also associated program dollars for the creation of a citywide housing plan. We also have a proposed redeploy where we redirect funds from one existing budget to a new for this budget cycle, higher priority function. And in this case, that's to redeploy one of our code compliance officers to a manufactured housing liaison or mobile home community, of which we have many in our city limits and just outside in the growth management area that have some specialized needs for direct engagement with the city government and in some cases advocacy. We also have a similar redeploy or redirecting of funds from some of our duplicative rebate offerings in the property tax and utility space where there are other options available to income qualified residents. And we're going to utilize those funds to create an income qualified navigator position. What that means is we have many different offerings at the city for our low income residents and other qualified residents for direct rebate or reduced costs programming. And it can be difficult to navigate across the many different departments that administer these programs. So the navigator will help pull them all together, make it sort of the one-stop shop for enter your information in one place, and you can be directed to all of the programs for which you qualify rather than having to shop across the various areas of our website. There is a reduction that is in the neighborhood livability outcome for our design assistance program. This is for new construction within the city limits where we provide direct support to designing features that are compatible with the city's master plan, primarily around energy efficiency and affordability. The Emerald Ash Borer for the uninitiated is really an ecological disaster that has made its way through northern Colorado, central and northern Colorado these last few years. It has turned up within Fort Collins city limits and was detected on the north side of town this year. We've been planning for many years around the eventuality of this infestation. And this budget brings forward the dollars in order to treat the trees that have been marked within the urban canopy for saving. And then for the unfortunate removal, but shade planting of replacement trees for the trees that our forestry staff has determined are not going to survive the infestation. And then we have continuing enhancement dollars around homelessness initiatives and human service funding. So that's the neighborhood livability and social health outcome in a fairly brief nutshell. And again, just focused on kind of what's different about this budget versus previous cycles. I'll move us ahead towards the second of our three outcomes tonight, safe community. Our strategy statement, Fort Collins provides a safe place to live, work, learn, and play. Some of the service offerings, as you might expect, you can see traditional law enforcement activities in the form of Fort Collins Police Services and the many patrol investigations and special operations divisions of our police services agency. But there are a few functions that might not come to mind immediately when you think of safe community. The city makes a direct contribution to the funding and administration of the Poudre Fire Authority in partnership with the Poudre Valley Fire Protection District. And then we also run an extensive stormwater management program that, among other objectives around the watershed within Fort Collins city limits, also helps to manage flood prevention and flood mitigation issues. And then finally, our ranger activities within parks and natural areas. So here's some of the notable changes within the Safe Communities overall budget. We have requested that the City Council support added staffing within our municipal court for assistant judges and clerical support of the camera radar and red light programs. What we have found with our growing community is that the caseload within the municipal court has grown both in terms of volume as well as the complexity of the cases that they take on within the court. We have brought forward at this point in time certain scaled down reductions within police services across several departments. We'd be happy to speak to those in additional detail if that's an area of interest. And then staff is also well prepared for an ongoing and emerging discussion that has been prompted around national events and then really supported strongly by members of the City Council in creating an ad hoc committee to discuss the issues surrounding resource investment in law enforcement versus community investments. And while we expect that the findings aren't ultimately going to be ready for this particular budget cycle, we are creating space and time in the early part of 2021 so that this budget can be revisited by the current council in case there are any resultant changes they'd like to make to the law enforcement budget. There is a new police training facility. It's down at the airport. It's shared with Loveland in a 50-50 partnership. And that construction is scheduled to be complete this year, and will begin with classroom training and a driving course at that facility. Emergency preparedness and security. 2020 has made it all too clear of the need to make investments in programming and technology within EPS, or emergency preparedness. I already mentioned stormwater enhancements, and there's just a couple of the locations noted here on the slide around the city where you might see those stormwater enhancements. We have a proposed redirection or redeploy of funds from the Campus West Connections building. We have certain police services and neighborhood services functions out of that office. And it is a little bit of an experiment that has run its course. We have not observed the visitation at that facility that we had once hoped for. And so the staff is going to be redirected to new working facilities, but we would still meet the level of service goals and expectations for the West Elizabeth and Campus West corridor. So those funds that I mentioned within Campus West and Bike Patrol that would be reduced are going to be redirected into homelessness coordination, a new position for a homeless coordinator, street outreach, and restorative justice. Encampments within parks and natural areas is also has been a matter of public safety in recent years, and so this budget brings forward increased or proposed increases to our ranger and law enforcement operations around encampment cleanup and prevention. Finally, we'll move to the high-performing government area. Some of your core functions of local government, for instance, the City Council that you see pictured here, our municipal court, our city clerk function, our city attorneys, human resources, IT, finance, and so on. So the strategy statement is, and our objective here is for Fort Collins to exemplify an efficient, innovative, transparent, effective, and collaborative city government. So some of the offerings here within this budget, I mentioned a few of them on the previous slide. As you might imagine, for a city of our size, we have roughly 2,500 coworkers that work for the city, and a vehicle fleet that, if memory serves, numbers almost 800 to 1,000 vehicles and bucket trucks, police cars, and so forth. It's quite an extensive operation. So you'll see much of the fleet and facility maintenance that you see pictured here on the slide is housed within this budget. Also, it being an election year, this year nationally and next year locally, our elections expenses are also run through this outcome area. So some of the notable changes versus previous budget cycles to the high performing government, or HPG area. The city has instituted and enacted a hiring freeze this year. That was announced back in April of this year when it became apparent that this was going to be an extended pandemic and resultant economic crisis. And we've also proposed that we freeze pay. While there are no pay reductions or workforce reductions, city staff has brought forward a recommendation that we know that it's going to be a tough and tight year for city staff and all of our many colleagues across the city's functions. Our utilities data management and application management is an investment we're making that helps support our climate action goals so that utility customers can get real-time analytics on their utility consumption and how they might fit into some of our greater goals around climate action and air quality. We've also brought forward a reduction on scaled back communications, media monitoring, and advertising, reduced leadership development and other staff enrichment opportunities for career development amongst the city staff. We've scaled back certain supplies for and equipment pertaining to safety for our field crews. These are unused budget. I don't want to give anybody the impression that we don't take safety seriously as a staff. On the contrary, we believe that this unused budget can be cut and that we will still continue to meet our goals around workplace safety for our many crews that work outdoors and indoors. This budget also brings forward reduced fleet maintenance, so increased schedules for vehicle replacement, longer time for oil changes and other maintenance costs of the fleet, and really trying to make sure that our dollar stretches as far as it can in a really tough budget year. And so with that, I'm just going to revisit the key dates here for everybody's reference. I would also love to invite everybody to visit our website. It's at ourcity.fcgov.com/2021 budget is a great way to get involved during and beyond the listening session that we've got here for you this evening. So I'll close it out there and welcome back in Council Member Emily Gorgel and Jenny Sawyer as we transition into Q&A and open dialogue with our attendees tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Travis. So now we really will kind of look at our questions that are coming in, and I'm going to punt this first one forward. Travis, this may be you or Lawrence, but can you talk about, we are using a lot of reserves this year. Can you talk about some of the strategy behind that?
I'd be happy to. It's a wonderful question. And if I was more prescient, I would have pulled up the slide in advance on the use of reserves year over year. So the city has, over the years, accumulated, sort of the savings account, if you will, if you want to think of it in terms of your own household budget. And in any given year, it's not considered a third rail or improper to use reserves. In fact, in a normal year, we will use between $20 and $25 million of city reserves and then allow them to accumulate. And those reserves typically go to key projects. What we try and avoid as a city staff is using our reserves for ongoing expenses. In other words, we only want to pull from that savings account to fund something on a one-time basis, like a specific bridge or specific city facility, rather than something that's ongoing in nature, like staffing and other ongoing costs of the city's operation. In this year, we're scheduled to draw $47.5 million from the city reserves. It's a high amount. It's certainly the high water mark for the last 10 years and most likely beyond. Within that $47 million, it's important to note that much of it is designed and deliberate even before COVID-19. So for instance, there is a $12.5 million reserve draw for the Vine-LeMay overpass. If members of this call are familiar with that part of town, there's a stop sign there currently. And when the railroad switchyard that's nearby is in operation, there can be substantial delays to traffic, even up to 2 hours of delay. So the proposed budget has a substantial reserve draw in order to build an overpass to get over the railroad tracks. So that's sort of by design. In the spirit of the question and kind of what's an appropriate use of reserves, the amount that we're using this year towards those ongoing recurring expenses is right around $13 million. And in a normal year, if you will, it'll be $5 to $6 million that are used towards ongoing expenses. So that's, if we're trying to contextualize how much we're using this year versus past years, the comparison I would draw is that $13 million number this year versus the $5 to $6 million that we've seen in years past. And that is a direct result of the COVID impact. And we're in a fortunate position as a city that we're able to continue offering services without interruption while we try and navigate this level of unprecedented volatility. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thanks, Travis. I'm going to kind of combine a few here, and they're really sort of general to our process of, how will we judge? What do we hope that these offers, really all of them and some of these enhancements, like what does success look like? How do we judge the outputs, if you will? How are they evaluated? And then how do we also prioritize them within, I guess what I'm saying is maybe even speak some to our strategic plan and the objectives and how we, just our systematic way of looking at these offers and evaluating them. And maybe that's a Travis or Lawrence, and then Emily as well.
Yeah, Councilmember Gorgel, I'd love to invite Lawrence onto the line to, give us a brief overview similar to what we did with the council last night on how we have objectives, budget offers, and metrics that are all tracked carefully in order to make sure that, it's a good investment that we're making anytime there's an area of the budget that's expanded or reduced. So Lawrence Pollock is our budget director with the city. Lawrence, I would really appreciate that brief overview.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. So we often state that our budget process, which is traditionally a 2-year process, or we do a 2-year budget, which has been modified to just a 1-year budget due to the impact of COVID. But generally in that 2-year period, we say that our budgeting process begins with the strategic plan. So you think about the highest level, we have our outcomes. Today we're talking about 3 of them: neighborhood livability and social health, safe community, and high performing government. So those are 3 of the big overarching outcomes that we want to achieve. Within each of those outcomes, the strategic plan, which is adopted by City Council, also has about 6 to 9 objectives or goals, the things that we are trying to achieve. And our ability to achieve those goals will help us attain those 7 outcomes. The way that we do that is through the budgeting process, where we create budget requests for programs, services, and initiatives. So anything that you see as listed as a budget request, it says enhancement or redeploy or reduction, all of those are budget requests that are meant to resource the strategic plan, specifically objectives or goals within that strategic plan. And so every budget request has to support at least one strategic objective, and in the narrative that is posted online, describe how this program, service, or initiative actually supports those goals. And then internally, every program, service, or initiative has performance metrics or indicators of the performance of that service or program. And we monitor those internally with managerial reviews on a monthly basis, so that over the course of the year, we're evaluating the strategic plan and every objective, every goal in that plan at least 4 times a year, as well as every funded initiative that we look at as commitments to our community that help support and resource that strategic plan and help us achieve those goals.
Thanks, Lawrence. I just wanted to add on, for example, we have some redeploys for mobile home park liaison position type, and then we also have a new enhancement for a housing manager. And so just looking at some of our outcomes in neighborhood livability, we have improve and increase availability and choice of quality housing that is affordable to a broad range of income levels. And so in our budget as well, there are links to those measurable outcomes that we use. And I think that, there is some space that we are creating indicators. So one of those is our equity work. We've been working on creating indicators of equity that will be able to tie to more of these outcomes. And so, I think that we have been really intentional about what are our top priorities, and with budget cuts, how are we going to support moving those forward to really address where the community has said that they want to see some work. And a lot of that is housing and supporting our residents, particularly in mobile home communities. So I just wanted to point those out. I know the document for the budget is quite large. And so, Lawrence and I talked last night about making those outcomes more accessible. So we'll be working on that and being able to tie those better to the objectives. So just wanted to point those out. Thanks.
And if I may add, we plan to have that posted to fcgov.com /budget, as well as the Our City page within the next 2 weeks.
Great. Thank you so much, Lawrence.
Sure.
So, knowing it's a lot to ask to have that whole thing committed to memory, but many of you have been part of these ongoing conversations. Can you shed any light on how the police training facility really ties to enhancing our community safety? And then also, is there an amount that we can provide on how much is spent on community policing? That's really putting you on the spot, I know.
The amount may be challenging for me to pull,
Yeah.
and particularly in sincerity, when we use the phrase community policing, I know that that's a phrase that can mean different things to different people, and I'll take it to mean community investment type of policing that is focused on liaising with the community rather than what many will think of the more straightforward enforcement of the law. We'll start with the training facility. As I mentioned, this is a facility that costs roughly $18 million and has been in the works for many years. Our police force for quite a while was having to commute down to Castle Rock to do the types of training exercises that they were hoping to do more locally, particularly around firearm training. Here within town, there's a facility they currently use that's a single lane, whereas the new facility is multiple lanes and allows for a variety of different training exercises. I mentioned the driving track. I believe, I want to say it's a 1 mile track, and it's also a skid pad there, so that in addition to police services, I believe our fire authority is also planning to spend some amount of time training on some of the more difficult driving tactics that need to be employed as part of their course of work. And then classroom space, as I mentioned, is really where a lot of the current learnings around how law enforcement agencies interact with their communities, that can take place in those classroom spaces, which we're lacking up until this point. So that's kind of the three categories of offerings in a very brief nutshell that I'm sure our police chief would do a greater justice towards. As far as the level of dollar investment into community policing, I'd prefer to speak to the services, and then if Lawrence is able to quickly glean the dollar amounts, that'd be helpful, and if not, no pressure. But some of the offerings we have there that can be classified as community policing will be our school resource officers. And then we have a unique sworn but not badged classification officer called a community service officer. You may see them around town. They're in a marked vehicle that's very different from a traditional police vehicle. And they're focused on sort of those, neighborhood handshake kind of relationships, well in advance of any need for, criminal law enforcement type investigations. And then I think it's also important that we not limit community policing to be a conversation that's combined within the police agency. There is a great deal of social service programming that I think can go into that category of community investments, as well as, areas like our rangers within parks and natural areas, and many more that I'm probably not doing service to. So with that, Lawrence, is there anything you'd like to tack on with respect to the dollar investments across any of those areas?
Sure. The way that you just defined, as you mentioned, each community may define police community services and community policing differently. But for the way that you just described it, the 2021 proposed budget is at 9.4 million. And so that is about 20% of the overall police budget.
Thanks, Lawrence and Travis. I think I'd also just add that having our own training facility for police really helps ensure that the police officers that we have are policing in a manner that reflects Fort Collins. So other communities may have officers trained at different locations, and then they'll come in. But what we found is that we kind of have to retrain police officers when they come to Fort Collins, because we want them to police in a manner that's right for Fort Collins. And so having that police training facility really lets us control that, and lets us control what types of training and the focus that we have. So I just wanted to add that on, in addition to the numbers, that was really intentional to have that policing training facility so that we can ensure that we're training our police officers and have more control over that.
While you're speaking, I might read this next one here, which is a concern about our ability to follow through on our equity and inclusion efforts, and how will we make sure that our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color voices are brought into these conversations?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, and I think it's a valid concern based on history of involving people of color in city processes across the country. So I would just say that one thing we're doing right now is that we have a community impact committee that is really looking at how do we create a safe and equitable community for all of our residents, as well as looking at police accountability. And so I think one thing that this committee is really focused on is how do we take data and lived experience to really make a high impact on Black, Indigenous, people of color. So I think that one of that is how do we layer those lived experiences, and then how do we create programming that is designed and has input by our BIPOC residents so that the programming is really reflective of those community needs. And so, you know, I think it's an ongoing and learning process. And I think that the council is very committed. It's a 2-year priority that we adopted. And then hopefully in April, when we have new council members, they'll continue that priority. And really, how do we embed this as an institution from the top to the bottom? So I hope that answers questions. If there's more, I'm happy to answer those, but those are just kind of those immediate steps that we're taking right now.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to go, I think Travis, you know, we've heard this year, and it's been so great to have just so many people and new and different people involved in our budget. I even have friends who were like tapping me. It's really fantastic. And so everyone's getting a glimpse at the complexity and the challenge of both the document and the timing and how to engage. And of course, we're always working on getting better and how we do that. But we do have a question here, which is about shifting the timelines of the public hearing so that we can do more of that. My understanding is that this is in our charter and somewhat legal. Can someone speak to that more directly?
You know, I would be happy to speak to the legal requirements and, you know, our desired normal course of business with respect to community engagement versus what we've sort of been shoehorned into as in the year of COVID. And then I'd love to welcome in Lawrence, you know, to clarify a little bit about the timelines and, you know, how can we increase accessibility in order to continue to drive meaningful engagement. I want to start by just fully acknowledging the challenge of it. Municipal finance can be very complicated. We have got over 100 different funding sources, and each tends to have its own sort of legal string attached to it. So in other words, not every dollar is created equally, and that tends to drive the volume in the budget. And yet we do strive to identify new ways to make it more understandable and more approachable for the layperson. So the charter requirement, charter essentially being the city constitution, if you want to think of it that way, has a requirement that council has adopted the budget no later than November 30th in a given year. And so for that particular timeline at the deadline part of the equation to change, it would require a vote on the ballot across the community. But upstream of that is where we have the best opportunities to increase engagement. So in a normal budget cycle, we have roughly a 2-month engagement period before the budget is even published in order to really ascertain what are the biggest areas of priority for our community so that staff can attempt to reflect them as best as possible well in advance of delivering the budget to the city council. Here with COVID, we did begin that process later than usual. I want to say that it was late in July that we held our first community kickoff. And then on September 1st, we delivered the city manager's recommended budget. It is a fairly tight window. You know, we give folks roughly 75 days between the time the budget is published and the time that it is adopted by council. And for a 400-page complicated financial technical document, I understand that it's not a lot of time. So those are sort of the boundaries we're dealing with. And I do want to just say and acknowledge that it is different in 2020 versus our normal intentions and normal work pattern. So with that, Lawrence, please, you know, some of the accessibility feedback that we've gotten and have taken to heart.
Great, thank you. There was a chat that was made by, or a statement by Kristen, and I wanted to clarify that. So what I had referred to that within 2 weeks that we would be publishing to the web is a list of all of the budget requests and then the performance metrics or indicators that are associated with them. So the data and the charts and the analysis of how we evaluate the performance of those programs and services. As far as the accessibility of the budget document itself, we are hearing very loud and clearly about that we need to have the document be more accessible, more understandable. And so similar to an annual financial report that we produce within accounting that is even more complicated than the budget, especially for someone like myself without accounting background, we've created a public-facing version that is much easier to understand And we will be looking to do a similar type of thing with our budget documents. And we will, in the interim, to help us get there, we're going to be reaching out into the community, asking for people's ideas, examples that they have, things they may know about in other communities that are working well, so that when we publish the adopted 2021 budget in the January, early February timeframe of 2021, that we would have a more accessible document at that time. And then we would use that methodology for future recommended budgets and final budgets as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on that I know that it's a large document and that it's a lot to read right before, and there's a lot that goes into it. But you know, the budget doesn't start, you know, in September. It actually starts at the adoption of council priorities, which I think a lot of people don't know that whenever there's an election, council gets together and they set a list of priorities, which guide work for 2 years. So, and that's usually comes from council members engaging with residents and really getting an understanding. And so I think that that's an important piece, that the budget is put together from those council priorities, and then our strategic plan, and then what we hear from the community and what staff works on. So I think it's you know, it's not that we're coming in September and just kind of pulling things together. This is actually a very long process that we take what we're hearing from residents and what those issues are, and then creating offers and redirecting money to support what the community is saying. So I think it's more of a process than just the numbers. And I just want community members to be more aware of that. We are trying to hear for a year and a half and then create a budget that reflects that. So I just wanted to add that into as well.
And I'd reiterate, you know, it's great. We're always trying to improve this process, and that will continue in perpetuity as we go. So I'm going to do one that's going to be kind of quick, and then we'll take a longer one. But there's a question about police officer salaries increasing this year. That is true, and that's due to a contract, correct? Anyone want to provide more detail?
It is. Our sworn police officers are represented by the Fraternal Order Police, the local lodge. So it's a unionized workforce. There is a collective bargaining agreement in place, and so there is a contractual increase to police compensation. The next opportunity for a renegotiation, if memory serves, is at the end of 2021. And even prior to that point, if the council were so inclined, I know that the relationship with the fraternal order is such that there would be a productive and healthy dialogue even before the next opportunity for a renegotiation.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to read this next one. There are a whole bunch of questions in one, but it's kind of a general gist. So the question is around, since money is tight, will we still be able to do the things that help those that have the least, like our reduced fees and the federal money that we get in and what we use that for? And is any of that being used to help people that have lost jobs due to pandemic?
Council member, I'd be happy to initiate a response there if you'd like.
Sure, if you want to start, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, I really appreciate where this question is coming from. And the very short answer of that is, are we, to the first part of the question, are we still able to do the things that help those that have the least reduced fees? The short answer is yes. We have not made, in my assessment, material reductions to some of our low income rebates or fee reduction programs. At the same time, it's not been an opportune year to increase our level of investment in those programmings, but it was one of our key priorities is to the extent possible to mitigate the service impact on our community. And included in that service impact would be the fees that residents and businesses pay for their the city services that they consume on a fee-driven basis. As an example of that, I'll refer to our utility services. 3 of the 4 utilities that the city operates will have a 0% rate increase in 2021, at least as recommended by the staff. So water, stormwater, and wastewater operations will not be passing along an increase to one's utility bill in this cycle. Although those three utilities do have capital needs that will ultimately need to be satisfied into the future, staff recognize that this is not the year to be increasing rates across those utilities. Within the electric utility, we've proposed a 3% rate increase, and City of Fort Collins Light and Power, in partnership with Platte River Power Authority, do offer some of the most inexpensive power generation within the region and even nation at that. And unfortunately, it was not going to be the case that we could pass through the same 0% increase and still maintain the level of reliability and safety of the system that the community has come to expect. So that's the one area where there's an increase, and in other areas, it's been a concerted effort to hold fees steady. Federal dollars, we've received roughly $16 million of federal assistance this year. The strings that come attached with those federal dollars is that they must be used this year in 2020, pending an act of Congress to extend the timelines there. So those monies have largely gone to balancing the 2020 budget and the revenue impacts that we saw virtually right away as soon as the stay-at-home orders took effect. So the federal assistance has been part of the equation, and there has been economic investment towards small businesses in an effort to prevent job loss. And here again, pending a change at the federal level, that expiration would take place here at the end of the year. So I wanted to just kind of cover those nuts and bolts. And Councilmember Gorgel, I'm sure you'd love to take us to a higher altitude.
Yeah, I can try. So I think one thing is that one of the redeploys, so taking a position and making it different, is that, and Travis, I'm going to get the title wrong, but basically someone to help better streamline and coordinate access to low-income rebates and programs. And so what we've seen is that the city has different requirements to get those rebates depending on where you are. So if you want to go to Northside and you qualify, but then you want to go to the gardens on Spring Creek, those two things are going to have different applications and a different set of requirements. And one of the issues is it's just so much time to fill all that out and then manage all those. So what we really want to do is streamline, and so folks can just have easy access to participate in activities that everyone else does. So I think to that question, we're not reducing levels of service to those programs, and we're trying to make it easier. That is also one of the 2-year priorities, is streamlining those assistance programs. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then and Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, but that federal money came in into 3 buckets. One is supporting the city, supporting people, and then supporting businesses.
That's right.
Okay, good, I did. And so part of that, I think to Kevin's question about supporting folks and job loss, one is businesses so that they can employ people. And then another is, how do we really focus on keeping people in their homes, supporting mental health, food access, utilities, so all of these things. So the city is not shutting off utilities during this time and not collecting late fees. The city recently is starting a eviction defense fund to help folks stay in their homes. And then we're also working with our nonprofit partners for things like rent assistance. So I think, there's a whole bunch of programs that we're trying to do to keep people stable and in their homes during this time. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Thank you all. So we have a lot of comments and some questions just around the need and the use of our arts and culture, really as sort of a mental health and community enhancement in the community as we go. So I'm going to kind of generalize those and just ask those of you that have looked more closely at the budget to date, are we working to maintain those, I hate to just say amenities because they are somewhat foundational, but our arts and cultural programming and opportunities in the community?
It's a great question, and it is a real challenge to continue to really operationalize some of the city's goals around performing arts and other forms of the arts. So hopefully folks have seen, some of the playful things around town, like the painted barriers and so forth, and some of our online programming that's running from the Lincoln Center. The short way to answer the question is that the impacts that you would see within that outcome area in culture and recreation in 2021 tend to be public health driven. So for instance, if we are suspending performances at the Lincoln Center, that's something that's not going to be a financially driven decision, but rather one that's driven around safety and visitation. So that's sort of the short way I would answer in terms of the overall service impacts. And I'm sorry if everybody can hear my toddler over here who's getting ready for bedtime.
Not a worry.
Council member, if there's anything you'd like to weigh in on with respect to cultural services.
Yeah, I think, as the question pointed out, how important we have seen those come to be, especially supporting mental health and stability during this time. It's just such an important part of community health. And so, we fortunately aren't cutting programs like art in public places, and we'll continue that, and then continuing thinking creatively about how can we have folks access things like concerts and other art. Last night at council, we were talking about how do we create more culturally reflective art and things like not just statues, but moving art, and how do we really get creative in this area? And so I think it is on council's radar and looking at how do we do that, just given that people can't go to the Lincoln Center and can't go to the Carnegie Center. And so how do we create other opportunities? So I think it's a great question. And, I think part of this discussion is that if you have ideas, you can also send them to us. So if you have ideas about how we can enhance art in the community, we're happy to hear those ideas.
I'm going to do a somewhat maybe quick utilities question, and then I'm going to go back to some of our police and the funding and other priorities in the community questions. So first, though, on the utilities, it's a question about, can we help our lower income folks be less impacted by a 3% rate increase?
Yeah, I can very briefly answer that. So we call that rate classes, and so residential versus businesses of a certain size, commercial, industrial, and so forth, where there's tiers of rate charges on a kilowatt hour basis. And that has not yet been determined for 2021. Our Council Finance Committee will hear that first at its October meeting around how will that 3% impact different rate classes. And then ultimately that would be a council decision and adoption around the spread, so to speak, of that 3% and which class gets a 2 or a 4 or 1, et cetera. So I hope that answers the question. It remains to be determined, but it's very much on our minds.
And this resident is correct, right? We're seeing a lot of folks who are delinquent on their utility bills already. So how do we navigate that for sure? Thank you. Okay, so I may not do all of these justice because I'm going to kind of roll this in, but one is regarding a Denver program where social workers go out with the police, and I think we have started some of that with the mental health responder. But then a bigger question, right? The police budget looks very big, and are we confident in our staffing and our training of those folks? And should some of that money, again, be going to doing a better job of understanding other experiences in our community and ensuring, again, that this is a safe community for everyone? Anyone? Emily?
I'm happy to take the more policy question. Travis can answer the money question. Mm-hmm. I think and Jenny, forgive me because I forgot, the co-responder program. That was the first half. So yeah, we do have a co-responder program. We actually are starting 2 teams for the co-responders that are that are mental health professionals that are able to respond alongside a paramedic. So we're able to address any health concern as well as mental health concerns. And so we do have that program, and I think that, when talking with the police, it is really difficult to respond to mental health. And so I think it's a great question of, how do we make sure that those who are responding are appropriate to be responding? And so I think looking at mental health response is great. I think one of the issues that we have seen is that when trying to hire for those co-responder programs, it has been very difficult for to hire for that position. I think because it's such a unique position that when somebody goes into something like mental health, they think of social work. And so we're really trying to find the right person. So I think it's something that council is really looking at and really examining how can we best support mental health outcomes and should that belong in police. I think to the other question about police funding is that we, as I mentioned earlier, we do have that ad hoc committee that is looking at police outcomes and funding and how do we create a safe and equitable community. For me personally, and I won't speak for the rest of the council, is how do we make really good policy decisions based on data and feedback from the community and those lived experiences. So is the police budget really big? I don't know. It could be really big and we need to redirect some funding. But you know, I think part of it is looking at how do we create programs so that we have something in place to move that funding to. And that's really what the ad hoc committee is trying to work on is what do we want to move funding to really support communities, because we do want to stop the school to prison pipeline, and we do really want to support our BIPOC community members, and we want to know how to best do that. So I think that council does really want to engage and hear from folks, and I think the committee is going to really look at how to best do that, and we'll be engaging in the near future. So I hope that answered all of that.
That's great. Thank you. I want to thank everyone. I'm looking through. I have one more really quick question that I'll try to grab, and then we'll probably shoot for this 7 o'clock wrap up. Does anyone know stormwater work in North College? Is that being paid for by the URA? I don't know.
I would need to reference the specific dollar figures, but there are shared costs between the city's stormwater utility and the Urban Renewal Authority, the North College district that's up there. And it depends project to project in terms of that kind of cost sharing that takes place between the two agencies.
Okay, super. Great. Well, Councilmember Borrell, do you have any closing remarks here?
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for coming and engaging and sending in the questions. If you don't feel like you got your question answered, please email or call me. My email is in the chat. As well as I just want to remind everyone that we have a kind of council listening session next Tuesday during during our regular meeting. So you can come in person, you can phone, or you can Zoom, and you can just provide your feedback on the budget. So I really encourage everyone to do that. That's also not the last time. We have another general work session and then a final hearing. So we have, I think, 3 more weeks of engagement, and so love to hear from you, and please reach out. And
I'll do a plug for our existing engagement. So on our city website, not only is there budget engagement, there's also the ad hoc committee page for engagement. And we do have an ad hoc committee meeting on Monday, this coming, and the Zoom invite is out there, and folks are welcome to listen in on that as well. Super, appreciate it, everyone. And I'll share, Mayor Troxel was also on and listening. So thank you, Mayor, for joining us as well. All right, everyone have a good night.